you'd like to think that you could solve at least some of the problem if you couldn't solve all of it. But here's the problem. What you've seen are bills that come up wherever Republicans are feeling political pressure, they put a bill forward. And if there's no political heat, if there's no television story on it, then nothing happens. And if we do some sort of shotgun approach like that, then you'll have some programs that are highly visible get funded and reopened, like national monuments, but things that don't get a lot of attention, like those SBA loans, not being funded. And we don't get to select which programs we implement or not. There are a whole bunch of things that the Republicans have said are law that we have to do, and I don't get a chance to go back and say, you know what, this cockamamie idea that this Republican congressman came up with, I really don't like, so let's not implement that. Once you have a budget and a government with a set of functions, you make sure that it's all operating. We don't get to pick and choose based on which party likes what. So that's where the budget discussions take place. Now, if there's some things that the Republicans don't like, they should argue for eliminating those programs in the budget, come with an agreement with the Democrats. Maybe the Democrats will agree, and those things won't be funded. But you don't do a piecemeal approach like that when you're dealing with a government shutdown. Okay?
Mr. President, on the military death gratuity? On the military death gratuity?
I'm going to take one more question, and right here,
Mr. President,
your hand persistence has worked.
Mr. President, you talked about the political dynamics that leave House Republicans feeling that they don't want to negotiate with you, they don't want to come together. I wanted to ask you two things about that. Looking back at the 2011 default discussions of the budget drama, is there anything that you wish that you had done differently in 2011? And after this, what you call this nonsense is ended, what do you expect the political dynamics how will they have changed to move forward?
Well, I think it's an interesting question. In 2011, I entered into good faith negotiations with John Boehner. He had just won the speakership. It was at a time when, because we were still responding to the recession, deficits were high, people were concerned about it, and I thought it was my obligation to meet him halfway. And so we had a whole series of talks, and at that point, at least, nobody had any belief that people would come close to potential default. I don't regret having entered into those negotiations, and we came fairly close. And whenever I see John Boehner to this day, I still say, should have taken the deal that I offered you back then, which would have dealt with our long-term deficit problems, would not have impeded growth as much, would have really boosted confidence. But at that time, I think House Republicans had just taken over. They were feeling their oats and thinking, we don't have to compromise. And we came pretty close to default. And we saw the impact of that. I would have thought that they would have learned the lesson from that, as I did, which is we can't put the American people and our economy through that ringer again. So that's the reason why I've been very clear. We're not going to negotiate around the debt ceiling. That has to be dealt with in a reasonable fashion. And by the way, I often hear people say, well, in the past it's been dealt with all the time. The truth of the matter is, if you look at the history, people posture about the debt ceiling frequently, but the way the debt ceiling often got passed was you'd stick the debt ceiling onto a budget negotiation once it was completed, because people figured, well, I don't want to take a bunch of tough votes to cut programs or raise taxes, and then also have to take a debt ceiling vote. Let me do it all at once. But it wasn't a situation in which, if I don't get what I want, then I'm going to let us default. That's what's changed, and that's what we learned in 2011. And so as a consequence, I said, we're not going to do that again, not just for me, but because future presidents, Republican or Democrat, should not be in a position where they have to choose between making sure the economy stays afloat and we avoid worldwide catastrophe, or we provide concessions to one faction of one party in one house. And but let me tell you a lesson I did not learn. I did not learn a lesson that we shouldn't compromise. I still think we should. I still think there are all kinds of issues that we should be talking about, and I don't expect to get 100% of my way. And I'm still very open to having conversations with not just the Speaker, but any Republican over there. So, go ahead.
If you enter into a series of short-term funding bills or a debt ceiling bill, you will be back in the same place, presumably, with the same members of Congress.
Yeah, I think.
So what has changed in the political dynamic if you do the short-term?
Well, I think what has changed is they're aware of the fact that I'm not budging when it comes to the full faith and credit of the United States. That has to be dealt with. That you don't pay a ransom. You don't provide concessions for Congress doing its job and America paying its bills. And I think most people understand that. I mean, you know, I was at a small business the other day and talking to a bunch of workers, and I said, you know, when you're at the plant and you're in the middle of your job, do you ever say to your boss, you know what, unless I get a raise right now and more vacation pay, I'm going to just shut down the plant. I'm not just going to walk off the job. I'm going to break the equipment. I said, how do you think that would go? They all thought they'd be fired. And I think most of us think that. You know, there's nothing wrong with asking for a raise or asking for more time off, but you can't burn down the plant or your office if you don't get your way. Well, the same thing is true here. And I think most Americans understand that. All right? Thank you very much, everybody.
So there, the President of the United States at length responding to the criticism he's been getting from Republicans in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. 65 minutes, 15-minute opening statement. Then he answered reporters' questions, a lot of reporters' questions on a whole host of the aspects involving the government shutdown and the need to raise the nation's debt ceiling, even a question as far as the international response to what's going on, and a strong defense of the most recent commando raids in Somalia and Libya. Lots to dissect, lots to assess. Stephanie Cutter is here. She's one of the co-hosts of Crossfire. Essie Cupp is here as well. Gloria Borger is here. We'll bring in our correspondents, Jim Acosta, Dana Bash, Christine Romans as well. But Gloria, very quickly to you, I did not hear the president budge on the key issue right now as far as the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, is concerned. Boehner says we have to negotiate the debt ceiling resolution. We have to negotiate raising of the ending the government shutdown. The president basically saying all that's up for negotiation, but not within the context of these two ransom demands, as he calls them.
I mean, this was not an olive branch kind of a press conference. This was the president sort of hanging firm. And if you were to do kind of a word cloud about the words that the president was using at this press conference, it would be hostage, ransom, nuclear bomb, insane, catastrophic, chaos. Just a few of the words, better ones. Of the words that he was using. He did indicate that he thought John Boehner ought to hold a vote today, pass a clean resolution, and then he said, look, I'm willing to talk to you guys about anything afterwards. There seemed to be a little wiggle room on whether there could be a short-term continuing resolution and debt ceiling, wrap it into one, and then attach some kind of a process to move forward on that, which is an idea that some Republicans have circulated. But his bottom line was, look, either you're going to negotiate or you're not going to negotiate. Either we're going to talk or we're not going to talk. And until we fund the government and make sure we pay our credit card bills, sorry. S.E.
Cupp, did you hear anything new, anything positive, anything that would encourage Republicans to say, well, there's a deal there, we just have to finesse it a little bit?
No, this was the president's attempt to look open and fair-minded and negotiable. I'm here, I'm willing, I'm ready, come to me. But apparently, reportedly, he called Speaker Boehner's office earlier today just to tell him, I'm not going to negotiate on this. Look, the president's position on the debt ceiling is the extreme position. The debt ceiling is something that is routinely negotiated. It's been negotiated a number of times. And most Americans, if you look at any number of polls, believe that the debt ceiling should be attached to spending cuts. Because for all of the president's real world examples of defaulting on your mortgage and failing to pay off your car note, the real world example is that people understand you only up your credit line as a result of good financial behavior, not profligate spending with no checks in sight. So that analogy doesn't work for the American people, and his unwillingness to negotiate on this issue really puts him in the extreme minority on this issue.
As you know, Stephanie, the Republicans think they have a very strong talking point when you hear the speaker say, I just want to have a conversation, I want to negotiate, and then the president basically says on these two fundamental issues, no negotiation.
Well, I think what the president did today is clarify a couple of facts for the American people. And that is, if you want to negotiate, pay your bills, turn the lights back on in the government, and then we can sit down and negotiate. But do your job. I'm not going to do your job for you. And let's be clear about what the debt limit is. The president said this in his press conference. This is money already spent. This is not upping your credit card limit. It's already spent. You've already charged this, and you have to pay it. And Congress is the one that obligated that spending. And, what they're trying to do, it's also not exactly clear what Republicans want here. They're no longer talking about Obamacare, and that's why we shut down the government. And as the president said, Democrats have been trying to negotiate over a long-term budget that would reduce the deficit, put important reforms in place for Medicare and Medicaid, cut spending, and pay our bills for months. We've tried to negotiate 19 different times, and Republicans have shut that down. And now, with the debt ceiling looming, they want to talk, they want to negotiate. I know the president said extortion several times, but that's what this is. It's extortion. You don't do it when we're on the verge of a break.
We got a Republican Congressman, Trey Raydell, joining us from Florida right now. I know you're from Florida, but you're here in Washington in the Congress, Congressman. I assume you were listening to the President of the United States. Did you hear something encouraging from him that would lead you to believe this government shutdown will end and the nation's debt ceiling will be lifted?
No, he had a press conference to talk about what he was not going to talk about. Look, if I can just have a moment of honesty and then be a policy nerd for a second. Look, this entire place is failing the American people, period. There's a real conversation that needs to be had here where the adults need to come to the table, as Republicans are asking, and let's talk about what matters. And that's this, to be that policy nerd for a second. Every single dollar that this government receives simply goes to Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. Pretty much everything else is borrowed. And unless we do something about this in the big picture with Obamacare and with entitlements, in the future, short future, we may not have any of these things that the poor, the needy, and our seniors are dependent on. The adults need to come to the table here, and that's really all we're asking.
Well, so what's your proposal, Congressman? How would you get the government fully operational once again right now? You know the positions of both sides, the Speaker's position, you know the President's position. How do you fix this?
Well, how do you fix it? I'm here 9 months, and I promise you I'm working as hard as I can. But I think that the adults need to come to the table here. And every time that you hear the president say that he's not going to negotiate, not going to talk, I'm sorry, but this is democracy. Republicans are a small part of this picture. The Democrats are in the Senate and the White House. Democracy works through compromise, through talking, and through negotiating. And that's what we need to do. And you know what? In the past, with Clinton, with Bush, and with Reagan, deals were made and done, including under President Obama, over the debt ceiling and things like a CR.
Would you be willing to accept some other concessions from the president, but forget about Obamacare for now in order to vote in favor of legislation in the House of Representatives that would end the government shutdown?
I'm open to all ideas here, and that's why I keep going back to the really big picture here, which is not to go on CNN, throw out talking points to you about Obamacare or this or that. The big picture is how we are responsible to the American people. My door is open to President Obama and any Democrat that I'm serving with today to find ways, to find solutions and get something done here.
And on the debt ceiling, are you open to voting in favor of raising the debt ceiling by October 17th?
We'll see. I want to make sure that again, I cannot stress this enough, the adults come to the table here, we find some solutions, and move forward in a way that is responsible to you.
But one final question, Congressman. You appreciate